Okay, so I'm going to talk about the here and now. And as I said this morning, you know, I'm deeply rooted in my experience of decades as a university professor. I hope a good teacher and an innovative teacher, but nevertheless understanding those really significant constraints that sit on you, and then looking for possibilities of where you can expand and where you can innovate. And I'm going to come back at the end to talk about the experiences, particularly my own university. It's UK-based, but my own university in particular, about how we have actually significantly managed to support university teachers to feel valued in their teaching and feel valued for innovation. And I think, to my mind, that that's one of the keys. Okay, so it's all about scale and it's all about impact. So there we are. Whoops. So that's the structure of my talk. I'm going to talk about measuring innovation. I'm going to talk about the influence of MOOCs on traditional higher education, assessment, and then finish up with something on reward. And I used this thing this morning, and it seems to me that when you look at that, despite what we say about, you know, the importance of the teacher and the small groups and all of that stuff that we do and we value highly in higher education, it's going to be really difficult to deliver these sorts of things without a really, really big slice of technology. And that actually, for the university and for the university teacher, and actually I know lots of people here come from government agencies and European agencies and various things, but you know, the folks on the ground, in a sense, that you manage and control and pull the strings on, that for them, getting to grips with that and getting to grips with that is a really difficult challenge to see how they move forward. So they agree to both of them, but how to get there and how to do it is still significant. And I've always been a believer that if you wanted to change stuff and you knew that you wanted to go in a direction, that the first thing you did, and this is my roots as a scientist, if you like, the first thing you did is you measure baseline. If you don't know where you are, you can't measure whether you're going anywhere. And so many of us actually in Europe turn to the US and we go to EDUCAUSE, which of course has got a huge population in the US and therefore has been able to do these nationwide surveys and studies. And we go there and actually we sort of fingers crossed a bit say, well, if you see it in the US, you're probably beginning to see it over here. And it's a kind of proxy for us. But I think that without these measures of what's going on, what universities are doing, what teachers are doing, what students are doing, without those measures, you don't have a baseline, you can't measure progress forward. Now, we have certainly within individual countries within Europe, we do have measures. Some countries do take surveys. The European University Association does these surveys of universities to look to see what change is taking place. And actually, it is very similar to the sorts of changes that you see within the US, online courses rising, blended courses rising, MOOCs steadily rising. And the reasons why they're using them are exactly the ones you would expect, that they're looking for more flexible learning offers, they're looking to support students off campus. So all of those things on my first slide about where do we want to go, you know, the openness, the space and time flexibility, you can see technology coming through. But this is nevertheless a relatively limited measure. It's a measure of what universities do. But when we say what are professors, individual academics doing, what are students doing, we have much more limited data. So it seems to me that one of the things in Europe, if we are to move forward, is that we need a sensible European-wide measure that's got a degree of robustness comparable to what EDUCAUSE achieves in the US, to measure how we're moving. And yes, it will be, and I understand why governments are slightly wary on this sort of European-wide measure stuff. It will be a bit embarrassing for some of us, as PISA is, for instance, you know, at the present time for some of us, because, oh, those results are awful. But it is a driver to move forward. So what you measure drives change, and it seems to me, therefore, a sensible, constructed set of measures would be very helpful to all of us. We know, anyway, if we look at what's going on in higher education, that it's moving into the technologies. This was said this morning, and all of us know this. So you can go and look for online courses and you find a range of them from full degrees online, short courses online, for fees, or for free. And the number is rising inexorably year by year. There are arguments about quality for all of them. Actually, there are real arguments about quality of traditional campus-based education too, so we need to be really careful not to try to apply standards to this area that we're actually really not achieving within our traditional settings. So we shouldn't shoot it because it doesn't, do so much better. And as you can see from one example on there, we actually have a significant number of private providers coming in, some of them good, some of them not so good, entering this marketplace. And that's one of the things which will continue. I mean, when you open up education online to the world, your people take courses from wherever they like. And it's an unregulated area for us. So we are going to have to live in a world where people have got choices that actually we might not be all that crazy about, but that they are exercising their right to take their courses where they like. And so in this sort of world, the only answer for us is if we wish to our learners to come to us and learn from us, if we wish students to come to us and study with us, we just need to be better than the competition. So it is a competitive world, unlike the traditional monopolistic world that we've tended to live in the past. And I think that idea of competition in education, which I think will apply to schools and colleges as much as it will apply to universities, is another one that we're going to have to get to grips with. My own university decided a long, long time ago that we wish to be innovators in education and use technology to do it. I don't think we're unique in this respect. Lots of my colleagues are very similar in this light, but it's easier for me to pilfer my own university website and put stuff together and talk about it than to use theirs. And one of the signs, one of the markers for me about whether a university is serious about online learning is when you go to the homepage, do you see it on the homepage? And when we looked at our own homepage, we had this vision that we were going to be using technology and we were going to be offering online education. And we looked at the homepage and the words didn't appear. And so it's the first thing we changed. It's a bit of a driver on us because then, you need to put stuff there. And when you go to the top line, it says undergraduate study, postgraduate study, online learning. You can go immediately into that and you know that that is what it is. And in that is our postgraduate, fully online courses and our MOOCs. And I think that if you like, a metric, therefore, of measure is, do you see it there? I'm going to talk a little bit about MOOCs because MOOCs have had a significant impact on, I think, not on large numbers of universities because many universities have not really done terribly many MOOCs. But the thinking that's coming out of them and the changes that they're making, I think, will ripple through into the rest of higher education that hasn't actually, often for very sensible reasons, haven't engaged with MOOCs. So we decided we would do it early and we would do it big, and we've now got to this point at which we've run 32 MOOCs and we're well over 2 million in terms of enrollments. And so I'm going to look at the impact on campus, on our traditional education, the bulk of what we do. So those are the numbers at February 2016. And actually when the people who worked for me put that together, actually I was taken aback because I hadn't realized quite how big a thing I'd actually set going and run. And I've highlighted the numbers in red in that. Okay, so 2.2 million people, and you can go around and brag about that, but actually that wasn't the number when I looked at it that I went, wow. And it was that there. 200 of our academic teaching staff, 200 of our professors, and 200 of the teaching assistants had gone through this process that we ran to support people to understand how to go into this crazy world of offering your course online for free to students that you couldn't select and didn't know and actually wouldn't talk to. It's weird stuff for academics to do that kind of thing. It was that number that it had resulted in 200 people going through training courses. I could never have got them in any other way unless I'd paid them a lot of money. Very strange. And the number of academic schools, this number has now risen a little bit. This is 75% of our academic schools, our faculties, got into it. And some of them have come forward, had never, ever talked to us about technology. They've gone, technology and education. And they said, want to do a MOOC? And you go, doesn't make sense. But, you know, you don't argue about it. It took them over a line. And so that was the impact. But that one, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute, that one, I had not realized how many videos it actually took you to produce those MOOCs. That's a huge resource that, again, we could never have constructed any other way. It just couldn't be done. So it drove, scale brought impact. And on the video side, it has brought impact because we run traditional lecture capture, and people stand in lecture theatres and they give really boring lectures in front of, you know, rotten whiteboards and boring PowerPoints, all of that kind of stuff, because most lectures are really tedious. You know, my own lectures as a professor in the university have been okay, but they've never been, you know, you can't do every lecture be exciting when you've got 12 to do in basic statistics. It just isn't. You know, it doesn't normally happen. And so we capture these lectures, and they're not very interesting, and the students do go back to them and use them at exam revision time. They are helpful to international students whose English language is not so strong, because they've always recorded the lectures by putting their phone or their digital recorder on the desk and pointing it at the front so that they could listen later. So it's useful, but it's actually not a good educational process. But it's interesting now that the MOOCs have appeared and we've built them, that two different things are happening in parallel, and they're both important. One of them is that people are starting to use those MOOCs as courses within the university. So they've got all these resources, and they just, in a sense, blow them up and turn them into a university course. And the other is that they take the videos that they were using, and they use those, so the flipped classroom that we had talked about before. But I've now got people in the university who are doing something different, and they're saying, well, I do these lectures, and I have to do lectures because it's the only way you can do the course. There's all sorts of constraints. I do the lectures, and we capture them. But actually, I've started thinking about how we do the lectures so that it's made in segments rather than a 50-minute monologue, so that when we record it, it's already segmented, and I'm going to talk for 7 minutes on that, I'm going to talk for 12 minutes on that, and that's real MOOC production, video thinking, coming back in traditional classroom settings. So maybe the arguments that we've always had, and I've always had this about lecture capture not being terribly helpful, does lecture capture enhance learning? Actually, if the lecture was structured so that it was actually more educationally useful and you captured it, that would be a whole different beast. So that's an interesting shift in mindset of that thinking into the MOOC world, dropping back into this absolutely traditional world. The other one that we started to think about is pace and timing. This has always been a bet. These have been they're my bête noires. You can learn as fast as you like, but the exam's on the 5th of December. You know, and we do this right across education. I'll talk about assessment in a few minutes. But of course, with the MOOCs, we actually had to think again about that, and partly because Coursera decided that it wanted to go on demand. And so it said, okay, so your MOOCs are on all the time. And you go, what does that mean? I've got a course that's always on and people are joining and leaving, and how the hell will I understand what's going on? We actually had a real conceptual difficulty of understanding how to teach a course that was like that. But we knew they were right from a data point of view because they'd done this analysis. Two analyses. One was, when do people sign up? And the answer was Christmas. So, you know, when we're all closed and not working. Christmas. And the other one was that if you say, I want to do it now, and you sign up for a course, the longer it is before the start, the less likely you are to appear. And so therefore, on-demand made real business sense. It's the absolute opposite of what we do on campus. Actually, Coursera had to rethink that after a while because it actually was just too conceptually difficult to run. And so what's happening, therefore, is that you start to think, we need to run these courses more often. Never mind once a year. And actually, the Johns Hopkins example, which I've got over there, they have a set of short MOOCs they run every month. So you can start almost when you like, and you can go almost as fast as you like, because it's always there, the antithesis of what we do. We haven't got to that point yet, because I've not managed to persuade any of our faculty that they should be doing that. But the thinking is there, and the fact that some people are doing it will actually begin to drive others into the direction in which the demand and the pace question is beginning to be addressed. The other area that's happened is that as a consequence, and remember those numbers, 200 people who actually got bloodied in a sense in the MOOC world and learned how to do online courses that way, away from the quality assurance processes. I mean, we run quality assurance, but they didn't have to go through all of the sort of hurdles, and they're not accessible and scrutinized from outside. That playground where they could work gave them a confidence to think about, well, maybe we should be running fully online courses without students, something which we'd always found impossible to have a sensible conversation with people about, because they said, oh no, they come to campus, it has to be done on campus. And actually, that experience resulted in two things, one of which within a university alliance, and there are several of these around now, people are saying, well, hey, we could put all our students together in a single online course out there in the wild, and we based one of them on our critical thinking and another one here on global challenges. And you bring students from 21 universities around the world to learn together. And so they get an international, global type of education, which is different, particularly if you choose topics where there are these very different viewpoints on the subject. So a confidence to do that, but also a confidence to say, actually, maybe we should be running fully online courses for our own students in campus as part of their curriculum. And again, something that we'd actually found that, essentially everybody felt was not a thing to do. Suddenly you realize, hey, you could do this stuff, and there would be some advantages. So some significant changes. This is a slightly old slide, so I called it e-learning, although the name for technology in education has changed over the years anyway. Most of the time when we talk about this stuff, we're talking about learning, although I make that point that you can learn as fast as you like, but the exam is then. And that, I think, is the problem. That we talk about how you learn, and we worry about whether students are learning online, and is this better or worse than the way before. But the crunch at the end of the day is how we assess them. Actually, an interesting experience was that when we joined FutureLearn, and there was this suggestion that we should be giving validated certificates for learning, the answer was, you write an exam, and they'll go to a study center and sit it. Actually, I was horrified by that, and I tried to persuade all my professors not to engage with it, but they did. But it's just weird. You learn as fast as you like. You're learning online, but you go to this place and you sit an exam. That, I think, is the problem. And the reason why it's a problem, the reason that's presented, and it is a problem, and we haven't yet resolved it, is this problem of remote rigor. How do you know who did the work? Actually, on most university campuses, they don't really know who did the work anyway. And actually, to go to what you said about automated writing, automated essay writing produces perfectly good grade B and C essays. So we don't really know, but it's a problem for us, actually partly because external agencies hit us about it, even though it's still thing. The other one is traditional synchronous exams, because the problem of setting an exam is you set one exam, but if you have to set multiple exams, that becomes problematic, or else if you set the same exam and they're different time zones and times, that's also problematic. So that's a really difficult one for academics to deal with. And then I think that in an automated sense, in e-assessment, we still have real problems with producing assessments that test higher learning outcomes. And when you look at MOOCs in particular, for instance, they are not particularly good at operating at above an introductory sort of university level. So we have three significant problems that we have not yet managed to address properly. Clearly, as we went from time, it was, the individual student and the individual tutor was no problem, and so assessment was an easy thing. Once we got up to this level, but particularly actually when we began to produce more flexible degree structures, we began to roll online in, and then learners never even came to us, and then we hit scale. Increasingly, I think, our ability to produce learning opportunities and teaching, and our ability to assess, actually separated from each other, and we accelerated in the learning area, and assessment was, in a sense, left in the dark ages. I think that there are solutions to bringing technology into assessment that would help us a lot, and some of them are around, and I put in bold the ones that we have been experimenting with recently. I mean, for instance, plagiarism testing is widespread now within the UK. In fact, it's almost routine. But biometrics online, which is what we use in some of the MOOCs, video conferencing as a way of bringing learners together and assessing what they do. Remote 360-degree invigilation actually is a really simple technique that does allow you to give significant confidence that the learner who is actually doing whatever it is they said is actually doing that. And actually, coupled with AI, which is what Brian talked about this morning, some of this stuff will become even easier to do. But there are technologies around, I think, that we could do, but most of them are actually really rather clunky and difficult to operate at this point in time. They're not easy to run. And actually, it's still quite hard to scale most of these things up to higher levels. So if I was putting investment to the technology-enhanced area, I would say into these and into assessment is actually the way that I feel that we need to go. And so if I put that up schematically, I mean, from a technology point of view, we've dealt with that content end. We know that scales almost infinitely. I think for those people who worry that the whole of education gets taken over by technology and therefore, if you like, it's lost its human touch, I think that there will always be things down at this end. AI aside, actually, there will always be things down at this end of the spectrum which will be done by people. And actually, as education becomes more pick and mix, and as you choose things around the world, career advice and curriculum design and learning to learn, etc., this stuff will become even more important. So maybe the machines will do all of that stuff, and actually people will all have jobs in career advice and personal guidance and personal support. So I don't think that goes away. But these areas are the ones that are open, and I think, as I said, I think assessment is one of them that's the primary one. We began to play around with bots, Twitter bots, as a way of saying, well, can we generate something that does real-time reaction and feedback to students so that we can give them at least formative feedback? This was not about assessment for marks, it was formative. And so we developed for one of our most innovative courses, the MSc in e-learning and digital education, as it's now called. We started to experiment with that to see whether that is actually likely to take us in a direction. We know other people doing the same things. The tools that already exist at scale, into which lots of money is put, and so as a consequence, you can actually, you've got a degree of sophistication about them. And so I think we need to stimulate much more exploration of those sorts of tools as ways of generating an automated and intelligent feedback, formative and summative. So, last few slides. I'm going to go back to this project because I felt that within it, we got a set of recommendations which were the right ones for governments and the right ones for the EC to take forward. And so for what we've been talking about today, the recommendations come out of this section which is called Curriculum Design and Delivery. And I've already said metrics, so I'm not going to mention that one. I'm going to mention the top and the bottom. It's quite clear to me that those countries that have got strong national agencies that support innovation in learning and teaching in higher education have made significantly more progress on average and scale and uniformity than those that haven't. And so I think that's a sine qua non. But the other one is that you have to find ways of seriously recognizing and rewarding high-quality teaching and innovation. Because if you don't do that, the bottom of that stack that I showed this morning, the individual teacher, is actually not getting a positive incentive that innovation is what matters. And so I want to show you one example, and it's drawn from the UK, and it really influenced the way my university and many other universities have actually gone. And then I'm going to end up on a slightly more cynical note. Higher Education Academy, it's had a checkered history, and there's lots of things that have not been so good about it, but it did produce a stack of qualifications in teaching that recognized high-quality performance as a teacher from beginner to advanced. And you need that because it isn't a binary thing. This is a continuous professional development process. You come in, you get accredited as a beginner. In the end, hopefully, you're accredited as advanced. So I think that that's important. And then the question is, what do universities do about that? How do they actually support that, and how do they ensure that it's suitable? So we sat down within the university and we discussed this with lots of our teachers. Said, how do we do that? What's the problem? And the answer was that they all understood how to be recognized for research. They all understood how to document their research. There were no difficulties at all, but they said, how do we document the teaching? How do we actually do it in practice, produce a teaching portfolio that you can judge? And so within our human resources website, all of this is open source. I didn't have to go into the university's intranet to get it. We decided that within our grading and our regrading, i.e. promotion process and our reward processes, we would have exemplars and guidance as to how to do these things, and I'm going to concentrate on the education one, although we have the same problem with knowledge exchange. And so we generated a set of exemplars and a structure that told teachers what we were looking for, how we would judge them as good or excellent in learning and teaching, and how to produce evidence from the outside world and from the inside world to justify that and the sources that they might use. And then we generated a set of real examples that had actually been used successfully. We now promote many, many more of our teachers at university. And it's curious, isn't it? University teachers, we promote and reward many more of them now on the basis of teaching rather than research as a consequence of having put that one in place. And we publish the stats because we are as open as possible. We publish the stats on that process. So it is clear to people that if they are good teachers and if they innovate and they document that and present it as a case, something happens. And I think without that, you don't get a large-scale change. The cynical one that I said I'd finish on is that you can see in world ranking tables that education is beginning to come in. Multi-rank actually from Europe is clearly uses them. But in general, they're looking out to how do they measure teaching as well as research. One of the really easy measures to pick up on as a metric is how many of your university professors are qualified to teach. It's a really easy metric to ask. And in theory, it's an easy metric to deliver. So we could see this coming. And in the UK, the Teaching Excellence Framework actually indeed asks that question. So cynically as a university, if you want to do well in these tables, you're going to have have qualified teachers. And if you want qualified teachers, you're going to have to reward them. The good side is that you get better teaching, and the bad side is that cynically you do better in the league tables. So my conclusions, I think just about on time, are there. That's me. So I'm happy to take any questions for a few minutes before I hand over to Catherine. 2 or 3, yes. We have to be microphoned, purple mics.
Regarding the assessment, you were talking about the assessment that, it's the hardest. Comparing it to industry. Now, the industry has been doing things online even before. Cisco, Microsoft, you made them, yeah? And their assessment is basically multiple choice. So actually they started from assessment before they turned into e-learning. Has your university considered that? I know that, for instance, for a degree you need to write a thesis and or do a project. Of course, that is something that obviously is something else. But regarding exams. Have you considered, or if you considered, what were your outcomes regarding assessment through multiple choice, ticking boxes and things like that?
Yeah. I mean, am I still wired? Am I back on? Yeah, great. I mean, you're right. That with a lot of work and a lot of knowledge, you can construct really good objective tests, actually that test quite higher level skills. So they're not just about memorization. You can do that, but there are hardly any professors in universities who know how to do that. So if you look at what they produce, actually go and look at the MOOCs, because these are professor-produced objective tests, and you go, oh no, that's just awful. So you have to produce it, and then you have to test it to ensure that it's valid, and then you use it. Now, in settings where people do this a lot, and actually, for instance, in the UK, the Royal College of Medicine, Royal College of Surgeons does this, you have a really big bank of questions, that you validated, and then you select a random set and give them to the people. So if they've learned every question off by heart, actually, that's wonderful. That's fine. You don't have a problem with it. But that amount of work for the number of courses and exams that exist inside universities, it's unrealistic to expect that you could do that. So yes, we do use objective tests, and we do make students go into computer labs and sit and do machines. And in a few cases, we do them with laptops and they load software. But they all happen at the same time and on the same day. For this problem that you cannot generate individual exams of the objective testing type unless you have a very, very large number of already tested questions. Because if you produce 6 or 7 different short objective tests and you had not validated them and you give them out and people fail on this one and they succeed on this one, you will be challenged as the legitimacy and you can't prove they're legitimate. So it's theoretically possible, it's really hard in practice to do. Places like Cisco and Microsoft, and actually the Education Testing Service in the US, for instance, they put a huge amount of effort into generating those banks of questions. And unless you produce them globally or nationally for universities to use and draw on, individual universities and professors just can't realistically do it. It's the practice is the problem. Yeah, over there. And then it's yours.
Well, I've got more of a comment rather than a question. What makes me think about these MOOCs is that in MOOCs we have a lot of people. Sometimes it's hundreds of people doing the same MOOC. And as my colleague was referring to previously, you cannot have that human touch, because how can a tutor reach out to all these hundreds of people? Even if it's a team of tutors, it's still impossible. So it's very good to have online courses which are very small in numbers, because this human touch is important. It's even important when you consider the online moderator. The feedback the online moderator gives is almost, it's either going to encourage the student to go on with the course or just drop out. So you need to have this constant feedback, these skills of the online moderator who knows how to bring back a student to see what's happening here, to see why someone's so quiet, you know, why there are so many lurkers who are just coming in to see. So I'm a bit concerned about these MOOCs. The large numbers concern me quite a lot.
Yes, I understand that entirely. I mean, of course, the nature of these courses is that is how they are designed to be. Actually, my argument is if you design them well and you know what you're doing, you can have a much higher retention and success rate than if you do them badly. So there is clearly a design element that helps. One of the things that we have done is we have used what we call community tutors. So these are learners who come back each time and take the course with the others, and they help other people. So there's a scaling in that. But of course, you're right that some people come along and they would like to get personalized help and they can't get that personalized help and maybe they go away, and that is undoubtedly a flaw. I have to say, though, that in traditional campus-based education with very large classes, which is increasingly true, the human touch to the individual learner is not that good. And actually it was interesting that Philip, I think, this morning described Cal State in the US, in which only 17% of the students fail. They have huge classes. The human touch there and the support is actually not that strong. So one can criticize MOOCs for doing that, although at least it is explicit that that's what they are.
Of course, course.
In large residential campuses, actually, students do fail because they don't get the amount of support and attention that they need.
It has to be a skill from the teacher.
Yeah.
The teacher has to know how to orchestrate
Well,
the
yes,
activities.
yes, although actually you can orchestrate by using the power of learners, so it doesn't have to be the teacher as the guru and the god. You can manage peer learning groups, and they are very powerful, as long as you as a teacher know how to do that and how to make it work.
Facilitate.
Yes, and actually most university teachers don't really have that skill either, so that's yet another skill that you need. That's one of the things that we dealt with when we trained our people to design and to lead on MOOCs. So this comes back to that knowledge and training. Anyway, I've talked long enough. I'm happy to talk to questions afterwards. I need to hand over to Catherine.
We'll have time at the end. I think good question.